long time since we gathered. I think it was in February, in response to Pastor Gia's sermon that really led us to having this conversation about dismantling racism. We are after learning conversation here. And one of the things I'll share with you is when my family learned that I would be sitting here, they laughed. They said, well, you have an awful lot to learn. What are you doing there? I said, well, I guess I will model learning. One of the other beautiful things and very intentional aspects of our panel conversation is from those February table meetings that we had, my biggest takeaway was the wisdom that was just screaming at me from the younger people at the table. And so that's a really important piece of what we want to be offering here, and then sharing experiences across generations. What we're going to do is take the readings we've had so far and start to enter a few questions that we'll then have time to share at the tables. But our goal is to feel comfortable starting to open up this conversation and make these words become alive in our lives, and that is going to mean that we will then become uncomfortable. And so we're after both of those things, holding that paradox. So let's begin. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to just simply introduce themselves, say a few words about themselves.
Hi, my name is Amari Brown, and Pastor Gia is my mother. I am the oldest of her 5 kids. I recently graduated this past May from St. Kate's with a double major bachelor's degree in K-12 Spanish education, and within the last 2 weeks I accepted a K-5 Spanish teaching position at an elementary school in St. Louis Park. So I'll start that in the fall. Thank you. And I'm also teaching Freedom School here this summer.
Hi, I'm Naya. I am the second youngest out of 5, and Pastor Gia is my mom too. I'm 14, and I'm going to be a freshman in the fall.
I'm Bert Madden. I guess we're doing vocation. I work in real estate. I'm 50.
And I'm Nancy Berth, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am, except to say that in August it will be a big number with a 0. And I'm older than Bert, so you can guess. My vocation is I'm a bookkeeper. I have 2 part-time jobs, one here at Park Avenue and one at a nonprofit for people with memory loss. We have 4 group homes, and I do the books for that as well.
One of the things we noticed about these readings is that there's a powerful influence on all of us going to school. Our education systems start shaping values and beliefs early on. And what we want to begin this conversation with is just some general takeaways and reflections you had in each of these readings, but maybe zeroing in a little bit on school and education. Africa Janie Mills writes about race and education in her letter. Debbie Irving is tracing the formation of her racial understandings or lack of racial understandings, or ideas or values about race in school. And so we have all been students, and some of us have been parents thinking about how to do it right the next time around. So I just want to begin with a question to each of you as a student or as a parent. What has been your experience in school and education in shaping your attitudes and ideas about race? So who would like to start?
I'll start. So I grew up in a suburb of Rochester, New York, and I think it was 4th grade when the first African American student came to my class, my school. And she did not last the whole year, and I don't know why that was. And then I don't recall seeing Black students again until junior high, and I don't know why that was, but this is my experience. And then I was at a time of tracking, and classrooms were, there weren't any classes that I had that, it was like the same kids kind of marched through the day together. So I had very little experience interacting with the Black students. So now, fast forward, I'm a mom of 3 adults now, but they grew up in Minneapolis here, and it was very fun for me. They were at a school that had a large population of the Lao students, and very integrated together. My daughter had a lot of friends who were Laotian, and I was pleased to see the mixing, because that was not my experience. Then they went to a different school for 4th through 6th grade. It was at a time when Minneapolis schools were K-3 and then 4-6 paired. And I started seeing the title of the other book, people segregating themselves in the lunchroom. And I just didn't understand. I thought, but you're friends with them. Why aren't you? Oh, it's not like that anymore, Mom. And so it was disappointing. And that was in the 90s. Not that long ago. So as a parent, I was disappointed, and reading this book, it feels like maybe things haven't changed that much, and that's disappointing to me.
So I grew up in Apple Valley, Minnesota. I still live there, and I went there for K through 12th grade. And there were always kids that looked like me, so I always saw that, but never really in leadership, as far as teaching and staff went. Out of K through 12, I had one teacher who was African American, and it was 2nd grade, so I was too young to actually really appreciate her. As far as education and understanding race and cultures and things like that, it came around once a year in February. And it was usually a movie. It was never something like a thought-out lesson plan or something that a teacher put together. But, that's kind of to be expected, because I don't really know what the teacher could really give that would be beneficial. Like, the movie was really the best they could do, in my opinion. But yeah, it was always only once a year, and then we'd have a brief discussion afterwards, and then I'd be one of the token Black kids that everyone would turn and look at when we talked about slavery, or when we talked about mistreatment and things like that. So my understanding of race, I don't credit to my education, especially not in college. St. Kate's was very diverse, but it was very cliquey. So all the Black kids were hanging out together, all the white kids were hanging out together, and then depending on what your major was, you don't get to work with every professor. So I did not have a professor of color in the 5 years that I was there for my undergrad. So my understanding of race comes from my parents and grandparents and people that lived during that time and can tell me the truth, and not necessarily just this is slavery and this is what was bad, this is what happened, but also the good things. This is who invented the potato chip. This is, just the stuff that shines light on the positive and not just the negative things, as they are important too, but so are the good things. So I would credit my understanding of race to family members.
So for me, my understanding of race was when I was young, because I remember one time when my mom came into my class and she was talking to us about Black people and what the world would be like if there were no Black people and what they had created, which I thought was really cool. And then once I got into my middle school years, things kind of went downhill because there were cliques and like stereotypes that I hadn't known before, and I didn't really fit the stereotype of like the black person, like that I wasn't a part of that. And so I'd often, like, people would come up to me and they'd be like, are you even black? Like, what is this? And I was like, yeah, I just don't act like you think all black people act. And like a lot of people at my school didn't act like that. And then in class, we talk about slavery and the civil rights movement, and that was like it. And we'd have a discussion, but that was all we would do. And then in the book, it was like, just kind of reassuring things I already knew. Like, I don't know, I feel like I learned this stuff, and she learned this stuff, but she didn't learn it in depth. But like, I've always known that black people seem to have the short end of the stick, and that's what she was kind of talking about in the book.
I would echo, for me, my education contributed to my ignorance of race. I was pretty much in an all-white school as an elementary school. My high school, I believe there was one African-American a year younger than me. That was it. I think in elementary school, I had one African-American teacher, a female, and then in high school, I had one African-American female teacher. So my college, Large State University, was more diverse, but same thing, cliquey, very, very little interaction between the cliques. So like I said, I feel like it really contributed to my ignorance and just not knowing anything other than being white, only being comfortable in all white environments. The whole part of that ignorance of just like, I remember being asked the question, not in college, but what's it like to be white? And that just floored me. I had no answer for it. I'll stop there.
Well, thank you all. We're going to turn to Dr. King's letter in particular. Some of this conversation about race has to do with privilege and authority. And one of the interesting things we can discover as we read all of these writings is that there's the writer, there's the author with that person's experience and the messages they want to convey, and there's the audience. And there's something going on in each of these readings we've had about power and authority. So we wanted to lift that question up and see what each of us is seeing in what we can understand about both the author and the audience in terms of privilege and power and authority. Who would like to go first?
Okay. Let me read it a question. Because I'm still forming thoughts on this. Because the book Waking Up White makes me mad. I think the authors and the audience, who has power and authority. I think that the people who have the power and authority but like continue to exercise that power and that privilege to make the minority stay the minority are the problem. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, just white people. I mean, that's most of the problem, but just anyone who realizes that they have power and that they have privilege and uses that to their advantage, knowing that there are people without certain things, water, shelter, whatever. That's just my opinion. Am I missing the question?
No, you're wonderful, but you invited another question, which is what makes you mad
About this book?
Yeah.
Because how do you not know that you have privilege? This book, like, mad, like I'm angry. And I mean, I talked to my mom about it, because I'd never read this, but I'd heard about it, you know, particularly the GI Bill really made me upset. But just, to me, it's like, how are you not aware, you know, like, because we're without, you know, but like, people really aren't, you know, and I said that to her, I'm like, people like really don't get it, obviously, because she wrote a book about it, you know, but even just, in the process of trying to get my degree, my mom gave me this book recommendation to give to my host teacher, and she read it, and she felt she's like, I had privilege I didn't even realize I had. And this is like a woman that I know, like a woman that I've connected with for 5 months, like she's been nothing but there for me, so I know it's not like BS, excuse me. Like I know what she, you know, like I know she means well and has this well in her heart, so like genuinely not realizing that she has privilege, but still reading this book just took me, you know, it made me go back to that. How do you not know? How do you not see it? But then she talks about parents not showing newspapers, and then there was like sisters that went to help with the civil rights movement or something like that, and that was covered up. She never knew anything about it. So I mean, it's part of your upbringing as well, but even now she's a grown woman, you know, and to I was just like, well, now you're an adult, like take that you're older now, motivate yourself, move yourself to find out what that means. So it made me mad. It still does, and it probably will.
For me, one of the big barriers to not realizing a lot of my privilege, and I know I'm not alone because when I've tried to explain white privilege to other white people, this is one of the first things that comes back, is how ingrained that mythical meritocracy. This is America. Everybody's got opportunity. And if you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and work hard enough, you can do anything. That was pounded into me from the day I was born. And what goes with that, if I think about my life and the good things that happened to me, I'll use air quotes here, my accomplishments. People understandably hold very dear to those. And as I started to realize my privilege, one of the hardest things was to say, I would have before just said my accomplishments, you know, I got this degree and this and that, is to realize like, I was not on a level playing field. The field was tilted heavily in my advantage. Like, you know, if I cheated and won a contest, I probably wouldn't go around saying, hey, I won this, I won this, I won this. Like, it kind of felt like I cheated even though I didn't realize I was cheating. And like, just to get over that, like I said, that meritocracy thing that like, oh, I've earned this, I've worked hard for it. Like, it's mine and it's something I can be proud of. That was just a huge hurdle that, like I said, sorry, when I try to explain to white people their privilege, that's the first thing that comes back, you know, like, oh, I don't have privilege, I'm not Bill Gates, I'm not all powerful, you know, everything I've had, I worked for it, so hopefully that helps.
I was really struck by Dr. King's letter because growing up and hearing the news, it was kind of like when I heard the news about the Black Panthers, the news didn't jive, I mean, the attitude of the newscasters and how bad everything was didn't jive with the words they were saying, because I kept thinking, what is wrong with this? And I was little, I'll admit it, I was, you know, young. But I'm trying to correlate that with the power and the audience thing, where the people with power were probably very afraid, obviously, and so they put a negative spin on the news. And it's the same with Dr. King's letter. What a beautiful letter. I mean, it's so well written. That's not a surprise. He's a doctor. I mean, he's studied a lot. His vocabulary is amazing. Everything he says makes so much sense. It's so obvious the power and authority, you know, is it that anybody in power is blind? I don't know. I mean, it was very actually depressing for me to read that letter, thinking, whoa, we haven't come anywhere.
So for me, I've always been a very vocal person, and I always speak my mind. But I remember last year in the fall when there was a situation with me and then like 3 other white boys, and they were talking about the N-word, and they were asking me about it, and they were saying it. And it was such a bad, uncomfortable situation. And like, I've never felt powerless, but I did. Like, I couldn't talk and I didn't know what to do. And I just remember going home and like crying because it was so bad, and it like just changed my mind about people. And so in that case, like the power for me, like I didn't have it. And I felt so bad that like the next day I went back to school and I was like, hey, this happened, this can't happen. And then like overnight it became such a big situation in my school, and like everyone was taking action. And I just thought it was really cool that in that situation, like I took power. Like I'm glad I said something rather than just letting it happen. And I feel like if we want to have power, we kind of have to like stand up and move for it, you know, like Martin Luther King, he like did a ton of stuff. And we don't have to do a ton of stuff to have power, but I feel like if we believe we have power and authority, like we can have it.
Thank you, each of you. So our third question, each week in these discussions, we want to then start to bring it a little closer to home and ask what this journey to freedom, what the work of dismantling racism means for us as people and as members of this community. So we are a community that claims to be a multiracial instrument of transformation. So the question is, how are we doing? How does this discussion about race and our experiences and our perspectives inform this work of becoming a multiracial instrument of transformation?
I'd say that one of the things I've learned about being white is that white people don't like to talk about race. That we need more groups like this. It's hard to go to places where you're not going to be comfortable. And white people, in my experience, are very used to being comfortable. I feel like I have an autopilot. I just seek out comfort without even hardly realizing it. So just like creating more opportunities like this, because it's I mean, to face it, I've been modeled, like, don't talk about it, you're just gonna get people upset, you're just gonna look like an idiot. Just talk about sports, talk about the weather, like, let's not talk about it.
I kind of feel like I'm in a catch-22 on this one, because I, being white, need to, I don't know how to dismantle, I don't know how we're doing. And I need my friends to tell me, but that just seems so lame. Why don't I know?
Well, I know for me, when I came here last year, I went to like youth worship, and everyone was just so nice and welcoming, and it was very diverse, and like everyone was talking to everyone, and I think we're doing pretty good, like from what I've seen. like praise and worship. Like everyone just seems to love everyone, and that's what I love so much about Park, is that like we accept everybody, and I think that's really cool.
We've been here for a year now. And we've been to a lot of churches. Not just ones that my mom's preached at, but just as a family, we've moved and been to a lot of churches. And what I've noticed about Park that stands out from the other ones is that it's not just one group of people, and it's not just black and white people. It's a very big mix, and you've got families with black and white people and mixed children and people from other countries, and there's just, but it still feels family-like, which is great. And I've appreciated that. I'm a perfectionist, so there's always room for improvement. So I mean, it's great that we look the part, you know, but I think it's things like this that help to make it better. I know that my mom has been really active in trying to make a change and help people become aware, not just of race, but of other things. And so I think more things like this are helpful. I think hearing voices from youth, just from all along the spectrum, just to get different opinions, because there are things that we don't think about. I mean, we're 9 years apart, and so I've been like, wow, every time she talks, you know, just, you never really know what they're thinking about, not just Doritos. So, but yeah, I think that being open and vulnerable and hearing the opinions of younger people as well as older people, and then keeping the conversation going is a good start, for sure.
Well, thank you very, very much. This is a start of a conversation that we'll now take to each table. And Pastor Gio wants to introduce that part.
Can we just give a round of applause to